Do you hear it? It's getting closer. It's creeping up faster and faster, and before you know it, you're caught in the jaws of review season. Yes, that's right, friends. The doldrums of 2024 are behind us. There's only moving forward into an October that is packed with games to play. But which one of these games are co-op? Glad you asked, because you came to the best place to hear about all the co-op games that came out last month, all the co-op games coming out next month, and any co-op news in between. That's right, it's the Co-op Monthly for September. Let's get into it.
As Andrew alluded to, we have a lot of games coming up next month, but almost as many to round up from this past September, so let's get to it. Warhammer 40k Space Marines 2 took over most of our September, and for good reason, since it ultimately landed with an 81 on OpenCritic. We tend to agree with that, as reflected by our very own review. This game is just an absolute blast with friends. Most critics seem aligned on how epic the action feels, and there's widespread love for the great art direction and graphics on display. With the recent patch, it seems like the server issues are largely behind us, so I'm excited to keep playing and having a more consistent experience too. Another game we played this past month was Towerborne, which launched onto Early Access on September 10th. There's only one review up on OpenCritic, so instead I'll mention how it's sitting at a very positive user rating on Steam with close to 400 reviews. Our thoughts: we think Towerborne has a ton of potential. The combat is phenomenal and it has a great gameplay loop. It might be best to wait for the full release, however, considering none of your progress will transfer over from the Early Access build. But mark my words, I think Towerborne is gonna be a hit when it launches in full. Satisfactory launched onto 1.0 on September 10th, and it looks like that early access period was well worth it since the game ultimately landed with a mighty 91 on OpenCritic. This is a co-op automation game that's always sounded super interesting to me. IGN gave the game a 9 out of 10, so here's what they had to say. Playing Satisfactory alone can be a lot of fun, but once you add friends to the mix, it goes from great to downright amazing. Not only does building with friends allow you to get things done more quickly and bounce ideas off one another, but you can each take off to a different part of the map and still work towards shared goals by building infrastructure to transport goods and players from place to place. Definitely one of the more unique co-op games to come out this year. Check it out if it piques your interest. Next up is Stormedge. This is a 2-player local co-op roguelike that came out in the middle of last month exclusively on Steam. Reviews are slim on both the critic and user side, but I still wanted to bring this release to your attention because it's a game I plan on trying out myself. I'm really drawn to the retro art style, and we can always use more local co-op games, especially roguelites, so make sure you try this one out for yourself if it looks up your alley. Another stellar release comes in the form of UFO 50. This is a 50 retro game collection from the developer behind Spelunky 2, and it landed with a 90 on OpenCritic. Only half of the games are co-op, but as someone that's slowly making their way through that collection, I can tell you it's something special. So far, I've really enjoyed how much they're able to do with art and sound effects within the constraints of games from the 80s. Hoping we can do a UFO 50 co-op livestream soon, but if you're looking for something different, definitely check this out. So, 2 co-op games hitting the 90s is pretty cool, but we simply can't keep that up, and sadly, Karate Kid Street Rumble has not been as lucky. The game is currently sitting with a 61 on OpenCritic. In general, it seems that the combat is repetitive and there's some poor collision detection to make matters worse. At $40 US, it might be best to pick this up on a sale if you're a diehard fan of the franchise. Remnant 2 was one of our favorite games from last year, and since then, it's gotten some stellar DLCs, with the Dark Horizon being the final one. There aren't too many reviews out on OpenCritic, but the consensus online seems to be that this is one of the best of the 3 DLCs. Lots of praise for the new Devoid Quietus biome, narrative, and the new Warden archetype. One day, I hope we can go back and play through all of these expansions, but we're currently too busy with the next game on the list. And that game is Ravenswatch. We played this co-op roguelike back when it originally launched onto Early Access, and we knew then that it would be a banger co-op game once it launched onto 1.0. Well, that day has come, and Ravenswatch is indeed a banger co-op game. Not enough reviews on OpenCritic yet, but God is a Geek did give the game a 9 out of 10, saying this: Played with friends or strangers though, Ravenswatch is an absolute blast. Gorgeous to look at, smooth and responsive to play, and peppered with the kind of variety that encourages you to keep going back and trying new heroes or pickups. It's another excellent release from past Deck Games and a genuinely superb multiplayer roguelike. We're playing through this as we speak, so look out for our review in the coming weeks. Iron Meat is up next. This is a 2-player local co-op game that should remind you of the glory days of playing Contra. It's currently sitting with an 83 on OpenCritic, plus a very positive user rating on Steam with around 100 reviews. The few critic reviews all seem aligned that solid gameplay mechanics, a sick metal soundtrack, and that splash of Contra nostalgia make Iron Meat a worthy pickup. This Nets game snuck up on me and nearly missed the cutoff for the video if I hadn't heard that it was launching on Game Pass. You might remember All You Need Is Help from an Xbox presentation earlier this year. This is a 4-player co-op game supporting both local and online modes, and it's also a rare co-op only game with no single player mode whatsoever. The gameplay revolves around solving puzzles together, like trying to fit into specific shapes while contending with various obstacles. There's not many reviews on this game either, but it is out on all platforms and both Xbox and PC Game Pass. And finally, we've come to the last game on the roundup, and this is actually a game we demoed at the last Steam Nets Fest. Echo Point Nova is an open world FPS title featuring 4-player online co-op and some of the best mobility I've ever experienced in a game. Gunfights are super frantic as you sprint, slide, and even skateboard along some really slick levels. I'm really happy to see it garner an overwhelmingly positive user rating on Steam. I would highly recommend you check this one out.
In October, we have a little bit of everything. Some DLC, some early access, some 1.0, and some day one releases, so let's hit it. Our first release of the month is the early access launch for Wizard of Legend 2. This is the follow-up to the much beloved Wizard of Legend, which was the same genre of a spell-slinging roguelike, but now has made the jump to a 3D art style. For now, it's only 2-player co-op, but when it launches into 1.0, most likely sometime next year, it'll boost up to 4 players both locally and online. Action looks as good as the first game, and we'll see you mixing and matching different spells to create your end-run build that'll hopefully see you through to the end. Definitely a title worth keeping an eye on even if you don't make it to the early access launch. Next up is Anima Flux, a unique 2-player local co-op Metroidvania. Not every day you see a cooperative Metroidvania, and what's interesting here is both characters will slowly grow and develop in different ways. I'm guessing that means you each unlock different traversal and combat abilities. Very intrigued to see how that all plays out. Luckily, we won't have to wait too long as it releases on the 7th. The big DLC for the month is Diablo 4 with the release of Vessels of Hatred. This is the first big DLC release for the title after being available for about 1.5 years right now. It's seen a lot of lows and highs throughout its seasonal updates, so we've got our fingers crossed that this DLC represents a high. It looks like it's got the juice with tons of content and a brand new class, a new biome, and a new entirely co-op focused dungeon. There's plenty more I could spend all day on, but we'll keep it there and update you on how it's received next month. One of the few big titles leaving early access this month is Starship Troopers Extermination. This is a 16-player online co-op first-person shooter set in the Starship universe that was pretty positively received back at its early access launch. Between the fact that it's 16 players and there's a change in perspective, it is doing enough to separate itself from the low-hanging Helldivers 2 comparisons that we have often done here on this channel. Will it do enough to make as big a splash on its 1.0 launch day? We'll have to wait and see. Disclaimer as we get into this one, I'm entirely foreign to the Mechwarriors series. There's apparently 5 of them, so it's a long-running series, and the description for this one is throwing around some deep lore jargon, like piloting a smoke jaguar as you enter the clan invasion of the Inner Sphere during Operation Revival. That's a lot, but I am a pro at reading between the lines, and here's what I got out of that. This is a 5-player online mech title with a fully cooperative campaign that has full crossplay across all its consoles, and it actually looks great. This definitely snuck up on both of us, and it has some positive previews, so let's all keep an eye on this and see if it's worth checking out. It'll be available on all consoles bar the Switch. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in video games are like pepperoni and pizza. It just works. We've got Shredder's Revenge, Splintered Fate, and now the movie tie-ins Mutants Unleashed. This isn't a beat-em-up or a roguelite, but a third-person action title you can play in 2-player local co-op. That means we've got a dedicated co-op campaign and the iconic new art style that's pretty hard not to love from the movie. If the last 2 titles are any indication, we could be in for another shell-shocking adventure when this one launches on the 18th. October 22nd is the day of early access releases, as we've got 3 really solid looking titles competing to win the day. First up, we'll cover Lynked, Banner of the Spark, a cooperative action title that blends hack-and-slash roguelike combat with town-building progression between runs. Throw in the colorful art style, and we've got a potential winner here. Gabe and I are suckers for a good co-op roguelite, so this one will be high on our watch list if we're not able to jump in on day one. Next up is No More Room in Hell 2, which originally was slated for a Halloween launch but decided to throw its hat in the ring with these other two titles. This one is an 8-player online co-op zombie survival shooter. The gameplay loop sounds super interesting though, it's not just that. All the players are dropped into a large map, separated from each other and have to link back up with proximity chat to try and take down the main objective at the map center. If you die during the mission, your character's progress is lost forever, so there's an added layer of tension on top of the horror aspect that's obviously baked into the zombie premise. This one is also high on our list of titles to come back to and try if we can't find time in this busy October season, especially this very busy day. And finally, we finished the day with Streets of Rogue 2, and man, this is a wild looking game. It's a sandbox RPG roguelite where you choose classes like everyday scientists, hackers, cops, ninjas, and more to try and complete a run by taking down the corrupt president. This game is intentionally insane, and there's just about a million ways you can make that end goal happen. Again, this is early access, so as much as we'd love to hop in day one, we'll have to wait and see how these early impressions pan out. October 22nd is the gift that just keeps on giving, with the console port of Wildermyth finally making its way to PlayStation, Xbox, and even Nintendo's little console that could. This is a much beloved RPG that gives big D&D and Baldur's Gate 3 vibes, just with a 2D storybook aesthetic. It's always been loved by anyone who's played it, with an overwhelmingly positive 95% from players on Steam after 15,000 plus reviews. Plus, it's received its final DLC, The Elmen Road, earlier this year. We've always wanted to hop in, and this might finally be the excuse we needed to do exactly that. And we're ending this month with Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Yes, that's right, the first time we've ever actually cared about covering a COD game while running this channel. Yes, it's entirely because this title is coming to Game Pass, but at least we're being honest. Plus, it's a good year to potentially return, with the co-op zombies mode getting a ton of emphasis in the coverage of the game. We grew up spending so many late nights on this mode back in high school, and wouldn't complain if we found ourselves doing the same come October 25th. We've got a handful of smaller updates to existing titles that we want to cover, so let's knock them out to start off the news blocks. First up is the Neighborhood Watch free update coming to Dead Island 2, and I gotta say, this one is very impressive. It's an entirely new horde mode that can be played with 3 friends. You have a 5-day timer as you gather supplies, weapons, and traps during the first 4, and then defend your base on the 5th. You also play as one of 3 classes with unique abilities and stats. It's coming on the 22nd, and again, this is entirely free. It looks awesome, and the game already was a fun little co-op campaign, but now it's gone up a peg or 2 on my recommendation list moving forward. Nightingale launched onto early access earlier this year, but with a pretty middling reception for a title that showed a lot of promise. But that's what early access is for, and the devs have their biggest update packaged together in the Realms Rebuilt 0.5 update. They've overhauled the game's opening, a new campaign storyline, with handcrafted worlds and dungeons to explore, improvement to weapons and spells, and tons more, which was already implemented on September 12th. Hoping the devs continue to see this through and we eventually get the title we all wanted to see from those original trailers. Speaking of games trying to find balance, Helldivers 2 had a massive patch earlier this month that, let me just check my records here, it says that they literally buffed everything good and nerfed everything bad. And now players are saying the game is too easy. Man, game development is a fickle beast, ain't it? Well, whether you love it or hate it, they're still making changes to the game, and there's a new war bond available for anyone who wants it, so, I don't know, go Super Earth, right? We got a quick dev update from the Enshrouded team covering their 4th major update since their early access launch back in January. They talked about what will come with that one, including stuff like a weather system, pets and animals for your bases, and the first new major biome as they open up the northern part of the map. No date yet, so I'll keep this one short until we know a little bit more. Just when you thought you'd see the end of the Turtles today, we're hitting you with a quick DLC announcement for 2 more playable characters and a free update that remixes the soundtrack to give it a more retro sound. One day this game's devs will be allowed to move on to another project, but until then, we'll keep you posted on any updates. Another super quick one, we got word during the State of Play that LEGO Fortnite will be adding in a split screen mode for local co-op. Love to hear that. This is an awesome way to play with a kid or a partner in what turned out to be a very fleshed out and fun open world survival title. And finally, we've received details on the Sea of Stars Promise co-op mode. It's launching package in with the Dawn of Equinox update. Not only will they add in 3-player local co-op, but a revamped prologue, bonus cinematic scenes, a speedrunner mode, and so much more. This is out on November 12th and will arrive ahead of the Free Throes of the Watchmaker DLC that adds a completely new storyline, which is what you've been watching in the background during this block. That's a lot of free stuff for a game that already gave a lot of fun in the base package.
Let's keep the news train running with updates on upcoming titles, most of which we heard from the recent PlayStation State of Play. But before we dive into any more State of Play news, let's talk about Little Nightmares 3. The upcoming co-op horror title got the IGN first treatment with a deep dive into how it plays in co-op. The preview highlighted how each character has unique equipment, like say a bow, and how the puzzles challenge you to use your unique abilities in tandem. It's a bummer this one doesn't have local co-op, but it's nice to know there's a friend pass option, so only one of you has to buy the game. Now, if we could only get a firm release date. Moving on to the news that came out of the State of Play, and we finally have an update on the upcoming co-op sandbox title Towers of Agaspa. Alongside a new trailer, we got an early access release window for this November and the confirmation that it's launching on PS5. I think this might be the first game launching into early access on PS5. I know Xbox has their game preview program, but this might be a first for PlayStation. Release dates keep on coming, with LEGO Horizon Avengers launching later this year on November 14th. You know, I'm actually pretty excited for this. In this channel, we actually like Horizon, but not enough to buy that new remaster, so let's move on. Now, this last news story came as a total surprise, so you know what? Let's just roll the clip, bro. Yeah, that's right, Monster Hunter Wilds is coming out on February 28th. Seriously, didn't expect this from what seemed like a low-key State of Play, but we couldn't be more excited. Move aside other games, February 2025 belongs to the Hunters.
Alright, it's time to finish up with some brand new game announcements, starting with Starlight Revolver, a 4-player online hack-and-slash roguelike that's got a color palette bright enough to put Hello Kitty to shame. I based those genres off of what I've seen in this trailer and what you can find over on their Steam page. There also seems to be a lot of RPG mechanics like character abilities and upgrades, plus a crafting system for your weapons, and the hub world will support tons of players where you can take care of your crafting and also hit up some fishing, because of course you can fish. Sounds similar to Towerborne, which we talked about at the beginning of the monthly. Right now there's no release date though, and it will first be available in early access, so be sure to wishlist this on Steam if you want to keep up with the title. The next title in the My Time series was just announced and fully backed on Kickstarter in My Time at Evershine. It set a goal of $200,000 and knocked it out within like literally an hour. Last time I checked, they were sitting pretty at $1.5 million. So yeah, these games have an audience. They've all been a combo of a cozy town sim combined with action RPG combat and usually a dash of romanceable characters on the side. This looks to keep those traditions going with a slightly less cutesy aesthetic going on. We haven't been big into these titles or cozy co-op games in general, but with 4-player online co-op, maybe Evershine is the one to make it happen. Right now there's no release date, so check out their Steam page to keep up to date. The final game announcement, and maybe my favorite, is for Dune Crawl. This is an online co-op action adventure where you're essentially playing as a desert pirate that pilots giant dune crawlers, aka crab pirate ships. Yeah, I love that. There's not a whole lot of detail outside of that though, nor a release date, so here's my last time I'll say to wishlist it on Steam because it makes a huge difference for these small developers and it literally costs us nothing other than a few clicks. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for watching and supporting this series. If you're new to the channel, we cover all things co-op games, so make sure you subscribe and follow us on our socials for more co-op content. Lastly, a big thank you to our Patreon producers who help keep the channel running. We'll catch you next time on another episode of the Co-op Bros.